I'm from the Diversity and Civil Rights Office. This morning, the Northeast region is pleased to be hosting a Native American Heritage Month, and we are very pleased to have Ms. Bonney Hartley here with us today for this event. She is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the federally recognized Stockbridge-Munsee Band of the Mohican Nation. In a few moments, Tim Benson from the External Affairs Office will provide us some background on Bonney, but before I hand the mic over to Tim, I just want to remind everyone just some housekeeping matters. If you have any comments or questions, please wait for us to bring your microphone. This presentation will be archived, and we also want to make sure that folks out in the field can hear your comments and questions, so please wait for us to do so. Okay. Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand the microphone over to Tim.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Samir. Good morning, everybody. We want to point out that there are cider and donuts and apples available after if anyone's interested. As Samir mentioned, I'm Tim Benson. I serve as liaison for Fish and Wildlife Service with my associate Zinkala Eyring. We serve as liaison to the federally recognized tribes in for the service's Northeast region and Southeast region. And there are currently 51 tribes that either live in one of the regions or that have ancestral or historical ties to lands within the regions that we at least sometimes consult with. So Zinkala and I advise on the service on fulfilling our federal Indian trust responsibilities, on tribal consultations, and on other matters related to tribal relations between the service and the federally recognized tribes. We work in external affairs, and for the folks in the field or the folks here, please don't, if you have any questions about the service's tribal relations or consultations, don't hesitate to contact me or Zinkala. We're here to answer your questions. It's an honor for me today to introduce Bonney Hartley. Bonney is an enrolled member of the Stockbridge-Munsee community band of Mohicans, which is located in Wisconsin. She holds a master's degree in social science and international relations. Bonney has worked in a variety of grassroots, national, and international settings to promote indigenous community development. Since 2014, she has served her tribe as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer from their Mohican traditional homelands in an extension office in Troy, New York. In this capacity, she works to protect Mohican cultural sites such as burial grounds and village sites that are important to the tribe's heritage. She will be speaking about the ways that federal Indian policy has impacted the Stockbridge-Munsee tribe and how the tribe's current cultural heritage activities in New York and New England are part of a long line of tribal returns to the homelands. So if you please join me in welcoming Bonney Hartley. Thank you.
Kolamalsi, ni deshinzi tahe kwandohat, ni nonjei mahikanak, ni mahikaniwu, ni elongomati takwak. Our name is Bonney Hartley, or my name in our language is Tahe Kwandohat. She has her arms around the people. And in our tradition, it's like most Native communities, it's important to introduce yourself in your language. And I like to do so to recognize that my ancestors may be present, and so I want to speak to them in a way that they'd understand. So I've got my headset ready for what feels like a TED Talk, but I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Tim and Samir and everybody for the invitation. It's in honor of Native American Heritage Month, and knowing that you all are representing the government through this federal agency, and are, in some ways also interested in cultural competency with Native peoples. What I wanted to do is, for the presentation, is kind of share some of Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican history that I know is new for most people, and I'm honored to introduce you, if that's the case, to our tribe. I have a lot of love and pride for our ancestors and our continuing presence here, and it's a labor of love to do the work that I do for historic preservation. So I wanted to introduce you to our tribe's history and the ways that we're engaging in our homelands. But I thought that today I would do that through sharing our history in the context of federal Indian policy, so that you also can appreciate the ways that government policy has shaped our actions and options today. So you've probably seen this kind of image before that gets the point across about what's happened for hundreds of years here. So these are the different kind of what most people agree is the different eras of federal Indian policy. So again, I just thought that might be helpful to frame some of our own particular history as a tribe. So our history, because our point of contact with Europeans was from Henry Hudson in 1609. Our starting point then, we have a different, we don't follow this exact timeline that's generally laid out, but our experiences have paralleled, what most tribes have under federal Indian policy. So I'm going to put it in this kind of framework. So for us, like I mentioned, under the Doctrine of Discovery, which is going back to the Catholic Church, the papal bulls, saying that any people living in an area like here, the North America, that were not Christian are savage, and then are not human beings, and are able to take possession of lands. So for us, that point of contact happened first with Henry Hudson, who came up. So our traditional homelands, you can see the Mohican areas. Our tribe today is both Mohican and Munsee. A lot of Munsee people joined in with our tribe at a later point after contact. But you see our land goes through western Massachusetts, parts of Vermont, but the waterways there, where they're often called the river people, and specifically the people of the waters that are never still, because it's referring to the Mohican, the later called Hudson River after Henry Hudson. But that waterway, the Mohican, it flows both directions in many places, and that's where our whole identity and origin comes from, that waterway. Also then so we go from Lake Champlain all along the Mohican to Manhattan, encountering Munsee peoples, again, that are very closely related. Our languages, Mohican and Munsee, are very similar. And then through the Housatonic River Valley, and those are our main homelands. So for us, we don't exactly fit the mold of the treaty era that most tribes under federal Indian policy experienced. The information I put at the top is for tribes across the board, just as information. But for us, the Mohican experience in particular is for us long before there was formal, like the U.S. government, and there were treaties to have with the government. Our experience was in being dispossessed and losing a lot of lands within our original homelands through land deeds that we're signing with individual wealthy, at first Dutch and later British people throughout the Hudson River Valley and Housatonic River Valley. So for us, that's in some ways, like a treaty era that we're signing these kind of agreements over land. And the individual featured there, the picture is Eto'akam, who he's just an example of someone who did, at the time of our contact, he was a diplomat, and he, which runs very strongly in our tribe, a history of diplomacy. He went to England and was, appealing to the crown for different losses of land, at that time. So again, our treaty era in a way often predates the U.S. government. And then our removal era, usually when people refer to removal era for federal Indian policy, it's under Andrew Jackson, and people have generally heard about Trail of Tears, and that's the kind of forced at gunpoint type of removal of tribes from the east. For us, our removal is not necessarily at gunpoint or that fall in that era, but it's really about 250 years of constant removal, of just, that's really, has become what is just in some ways normal to our tribe. It's become part of our history where it's just again and again being uprooted and rebuilding. At some points it's just within one generation, settling in one era, finally being promised that land, and then being forced to leave again and restart your entire community, way of life, your homes, everything. So for us, that we summarize that whole part of our history as being called many trails, and that symbol that you see there, that's very important to our community, was drawn by a tribal member, and that kind of for us summarizes what all those removals represent. The circles in the middle represent the movement of the council fire, so like where leadership and decisions are made, from originally a place called Skodak Island, which is an island in the Mohican or Hudson River, which was our original place of the council fire, to later to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where we were removed and settled as a Christian mission town in the 1700s. And so that movement of the council fire, and then to where we are eventually ended up today in northern Wisconsin, where our reservation is. We've been there since 1856. That was through a treaty with the government and the Bonney tribe, whose land we're on there. And so that council fire moving is represented in the symbol. The two parallel lines represent, as you might guess, the Mohican, the Hudson River flowing both directions, and the curve at the top represents arms lifted in prayer, referring to that, the missionary experience in Stockbridge, which is a huge turning point in our existence. So as you can see, we've removed multiple times, and so I think for us, I guess, again, these kind of things I think are important to keep in mind for where we are today, and appreciate that despite so much that's been lost, that for us, we're always just proud to be here, to have continued on and to have survived, all that's happened. And because of that too, because of our long contact, like a lot of other Eastern tribes, who are very mixed, and so I know when you see me, you probably think, oh, I thought I was going to have this Native American Heritage Month speaker, and you have a certain stereotype that, is so common, but for us, we've encountered, Europeans and other communities for hundreds of years, so we're, everybody looks, very different in our tribe, and we're today, like I said, mainly Mohican and Munsee, but after our time in Stockbridge, there were also other tribes from throughout New England that kind of joined in as refugees. So we're very, just a mixed community of many different tribes today. How you can imagine, for any community, if you could imagine being forced to remove so many times, across, the eastern seaboard and end up where we are in northern Wisconsin. And the only reason we got the land where we are today is because it was the worst land in the state of Wisconsin. So it was, it's not arable, and that's why eventually we were granted the tract that we're on now. The other area we had first settled in Wisconsin that was promised to the tribe was on Lake Winnebago, and it was a really fertile, area, and so that was why we lost that land in the last movement there. Okay, so back to federal Indian policy, the Reservation Era that know about, that tribes that eventually were forced into reservation settings. For us, I guess I would consider our first reservation experience, in a sense, to be that move to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. That it was a contained area. That map there just is showing the there's the area that our tribe was to be to reside in Stockbridge, in West Stockbridge area. So that I would consider a reservation, and that we were, that's the land that we needed to remain in, and that it was all communal at first. So it was all, every member of the tribe who moved to Stockbridge then communally shared that land. There were four there's a missionary, John Sargent, and 4 English families that were assigned to also live on the reservation, what was called Indiantown before it was called Stockbridge, after a town in England. So Indiantown was it was a kind of an experiment to see what would it be like to take a community that has this very vast, homeland throughout Hudson River Valley and Housatonic River Valley, and then contain them to this very small area and make it a town. So it was supposed to be, if you've been to Stockbridge, you can kind of picture it's pretty much the same grid today as when it was formed for our tribe. So it's, a main street, and at the time it was the English-style homes next to wigwams all up and down the main street. And it was it's a missionary, or called a praying town for the tribe. And the experiment was to also have, in terms of governance, to have joint rule. So it was supposed to be Mohican tribal members and the English families all serving on the different leadership positions, like Board of Selectmen and those kind of town positions. So that was the whole experiment of Indiantown, and which only lasted about 50 years before our lands were taken there. And then our reservation today, like I mentioned, was finally secured as a reservation in 1856 through a treaty. So for us, I would consider those a Reservation Era experience. The federal Indian policy of assimilation and allotment, we did experience that one, I would say, at the same time period as other tribes. That's largely characterized as this Dawes Act, which generally is about a government census, and saying that the government deciding who is full-blooded and that by their determination, and who then is therefore able to have lands, and that if the lands aren't, instead of communal land, it's dividing it to individual, and if there's lands that aren't allocated to any tribal member, then they could be sold off. So across the board, tribes lost about 90 million acres of land under this government policy. And you've probably heard of the boarding school experience of tribes, and for us, we did have a boarding school during the Wisconsin era. That's pictured in the bottom left there is a Lutheran Indian mission, so we had that experience too. And my Mohican heritage is all through my mom's side of the family. My dad is non-native, but through my mom's side, my grandma went to that school. She actually lived across the street, but she boarded at the mission school. It's on Mission Lake that you see people on the water there. But so anyway, during that era, we had the boarding school experience, and then the blood quantum was what really hit our tribe hard, as it has most other tribes too. That then, with the government deciding who is going to be what percentage of blood, which was an outside concept to tribes in general. We had other ways of determining who your community is, who your people are. So from that experience, it's really kind of a government strategy in a way to then at some point the tribes are going to die out if you are always going by the blood quantum policy. So I think that's part of the assimilation goal from the government at that era. So I think all of these different eras are trying to get at what do you do about Native American problem, as it's called. And so our tribe is no different in that we're just kind of an impediment. And so at that point in time, and we still, for the blood quantum, we still continue to follow that policy today. And every year when we have elections, we have a tribal council as our leadership. And every year when there's elections, this issue always comes up of, if we should change that and get rid of that, colonial policy, and to have our own system of membership again. But then it's always, very difficult and complex to try to do that. So we still are following that policy in terms of our membership. The Reorganization Era, again, it's kind of like this twisting, roller coaster or something of all these different policies of trying to figure out how to address what to do about Native people across the country. So for us, the Reorganization Era, which is when they're the government policy at that time was trying to take a step towards more tribal rights and starting towards more self-governance by saying that this era was about imposing American-style governments. And so our tribe did do that, but it also meant that we were managing more of our own assets, but that we were also hit by like lumber companies and things in the area. And so anyway, at that time for us, we ended up losing a lot of land titles, and even within this area that we are in now, northern Wisconsin. And there then was a Termination Act, which our tribe was, so the termination was if you are a tribal community that is relatively better off, like you have some sort of economic development that relatively speaking was seen as more self-sustaining than other communities, then the government policy at that time was shifting to saying the best thing for Native people then would be to let those tribes then be to terminate their status as a tribe and let them be more like a corporation or something, and lose their tribal trust status of the land. So for us, we were, because of the logging industry, we were targeted for termination under this policy, but our leadership was engaging in continuous litigation about that, and by the time those were going through the court system, then the termination policies had stopped, and so we ended up not actually being terminated from our status, which was devastating to a lot of other tribes that did experience that, but for us, we didn't lose our status as a federally recognized tribe. The picture there is of one of our past, he was a hereditary leader, which now we have elected, but his name was Carl Miller, and he was really instrumental in our history in maintaining, having the vision to ensure that we retain the tribal status and our land base. And he was mentioning too, just the Relocation Act was part of this time period too, of encouraging another government policy, again aimed at, this time it would be good for tribes to move out of the reservation setting and be more economically prosperous in urban centers. And so there were about 12 cities across the country where then, as a tribal member, you could apply for funding, like travel funds to go there, and then when you got there should be a government agent that helps you get a job and apartment and that kind of thing. So people had different experiences with this. I mean, there's some people who this was something that they saw was positive in their life, and others that found that not to be, that it was an empty promise, that when you got there there's nothing after your bus ticket or whatever there. So but what you did see is formation of urban Indian communities, that people got together instead of being totally assimilated. For us, yes, a lot of tribal members have stories about this time period of how they, for us it was often Minneapolis or Chicago that people moved to, and so I'd say for my mom's generation, for example, I would say for her era, most everybody left during this time. There was there weren't really jobs on the reservation, and then most people then came back at some point later. But I'd say for our tribe, that was really the trend, was that most everybody left, unless you were in tribal leadership. There was really no way to sustain your family there through jobs, so most people left and worked and then came back later. And so now, though, if you are, for this, generations now, if you're a young person in our reservation, there's a lot more opportunities. I mean, you could stay in the community your entire life. It's just a different time for us now. So finally, the era that we're in, and then is called the Self-Determination Era. So that era is more, starting with civil rights movements and then the American Indian movement in the 60s, to put more control back into tribes directly to self-determine, your own future. And so I just listed several of the major laws that came out of this era. And so the one that I work on, that I'm going to be talking about, is the Historic Preservation, Section 106, that law, and then the NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act. So for the work I do for our tribe in historic preservation, I just think it's helpful to see that those type of laws are, that we're able to use and try as much as we can to have them be beneficial to the community, but those are coming out of this, long history and that's how we see it, in the work that we do. So if we were working with Fish and Wildlife staff on the project to protect our cultural resources, we're very cognizant of history, it's not just a, new phenomenon that we're thinking about this negotiation over a cultural site. I would say, to us, we're thinking this isn't all that different from, the time in Stockbridge or every other era that we've negotiated, agreements over our territories. And it's just been this, twist and turn of different policies, but here's where we've ended up. So for us today, just a little bit more about Stockbridge-Munsee community. With our membership, our land base, and actually our acres of land now in Wisconsin are about almost exactly the amount of land from our time in Stockbridge, the mission town experience. And our leadership, we have our 7 elected members of our council, and they're pictured at the bottom right there. And we have 5 business enterprises, and so we're self-sustaining in many ways. And our 2 languages, we have both Mohican and Munsee, and both of those are ones that we're reclaiming and relearning. So with, I'd say my grandma's generation is probably the last generation of that had fluent speakers or languages, but there's been, everybody remembers some that's been passed down, and so we're building from that. And there's some Munsee speakers that kind of like us that ended up as a removed or diaspora community, and they ended up in Ontario, Canada, and so they have some speakers there, and they come to teach language classes and things in the community. There's an online class that I've been part of that's happening now. I mean, so there's a lot of efforts underway, and some people have gone really far with the language and are, really leading that now. So we have been heavily influenced by, Christianity experience in Stockbridge, but a lot of people maintain traditional practices too. So I think most people are somewhere, on a spectrum of both of those, or often integrate them. We have a lot of medicines that, in our medicine knowledge, we have one community member who's the medicine person in the community, and she, her knowledge of the medicines has been passed down since ancestors from out here, from Stockbridge and before. So the medicines that she knows and uses in Wisconsin are all from out east, and she's actually written a book about that. But it's pretty neat to see, that knowledge has come all the way, down to her today. Oh, and the picture at the top, obviously, is our powwow. We have an annual powwow honoring our veterans. That's what this one is. And we've had Mohican Veterans Group is probably the most active social group in the community, and it's just really, I think for tribes across the board that the Native communities serve at the highest rates per capita if military service, so we're no different. And we have, I guess because of our early contact, we have people like knowledge of ancestors who fought in pre-colonial wars, like French and Indian War, those wars, and then we fought in the Revolutionary War, Civil War, everything since to this day. So it's just very much a source of pride in the community. In the picture in the middle, there's our clinic, which is really nice now, and very, again, under SelfDetermination Era, that's really changed in one generation. So the work that I do, as was mentioned at the beginning, I serve our community in historic preservation, and because of all this history of ours, that's all from out east, then our tribal council voted to open up an extension office out here, so that instead of flying back and forth all the time to represent our interests, that we would be, our interests would be better met by being based here. So I opened an office in Troy, New York, just north of Albany, and but I go all throughout our homeland. So it's a huge area. It's part of 6 states. So I'm on the road a lot, going to these sites, and it's all under this law that I was mentioning, the National Historic Preservation Act. And so that's an area that we would work with Fish and Wildlife staff if there's for cultural resource issues. So we work with, in that way, with any federal agency whenever there's federal permit or federal funding for a project that triggers this law. And so the type of activities we'll do is, review the projects and always trying to see if we know of a cultural site in that area and try to protect it, or if we don't know, but it could be sensitive, then we recommend archaeology. And so I'll work with archaeologists in the field and observe what they're doing, monitor, and then we're also working on exhibits, things like that. But I think it's important to, in considering that, which is a great tool for us at this point in time to be able to protect our interests, that it is very limited, and that it's only when there's federal agency involved, like you all, or to some extent it depends on which state, but state laws apply if there's no federal partner, but it doesn't apply to private individuals or or businesses if there's no federal or state permit involved or entity. So it's limited in that sense, and also just what we can preserve, that oftentimes our tribe will see a cultural site as being significant and something that we would, in our viewpoint, we'd recommend trying to protect, but that ultimately this law that we're working under is all about the National Register of Historic Places, and so it's the government's criteria, of what qualifies for that. So we might have a different viewpoint at times on what we would like to protect than what the National Register will allow us to. So so this is a territory generally, that cover, it's pretty big, and we work on site monitoring and also trying to curate more and more of our own artifacts from these projects. So to give some examples of them that are kind of noteworthy, one is by Albany Airport. If been there, they're building a new exit ramp to the airport, and this is impacting a significant site that the picture on the top is 3 of our council members talking to the New York State Museum archaeologists, and we, along with other tribes that had consulted on this area overlaps interest with the Mohawk, the St. Regis Mohawk, who came to that area later in time and during the Fur Trade Era, so they have interests there too, and the Delaware tribe and Delaware Nation that ended up in Oklahoma, but are also from they're Munsee people from the lower Hudson River Valley. So all of our tribes consulted on this project, and we all unanimously recommended avoiding the site and picking an alternative that didn't go right through it. But that eventually we were told that alternative was no longer an alternative. So a different one was chosen that would go through the site. So because of that, so we wouldn't really consider this a resounding success or something in terms of we weren't ultimately able to have the site avoid being impacted, but it was in that this is just an example of going through the consultation process, what can happen, and compromising and trying to find the best possible outcome to the tribe's perspective. So we did push the agencies to do additional archaeology, more so than the standard that they were recommending. And on the bottom there, you can see we were working on this design. It's like going to be an engraving of dancers from our community from powwow. We took pictures, and then they're going to engrave them on the sidewalls of the overpass. That's part of mitigation for the project. We actually wanted it to say, all the tribes agreed that we were going to have it say, welcome to Mohican land, and have the name for Albany in Mohican, because it's by the airport, so we thought that would be good, but that was too political, so we settled for the dancers on that one. South Troy project, so again, this is where my office is based, within walking distance, and it's a village site, so it's really incredible. No one expected a village site to be in a very industrial area. It's where there's a wastewater treatment plant, and but it's right along the Hudson River, in between the Winans-Kill and Poston-Kill creeks, and we, with my predecessor, named Sherry White, she did additional research and found that this little sliver of a home that they found where the archaeologists found where there's a post mold from a longhouse, and she did research to show that this was actually part of a larger 5-acre village and burial site. So because of that research and the tribe making the case that we didn't want this part of, it would lose integrity to destroy this one part of a home that's part of a larger site. So Eventually, the Federal Highway was the agency on this project, and they agreed, and the State Historic Preservation Office, which here would be comparable to the Massachusetts Historical Commission, they agreed that this was a site worthy of protecting in place and not digging up, more of it. So that one we would say was a success in that they all agreed. We agreed it was eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, and they changed the road project to avoid this village site again, which is so rare to still have those in our area. Pilgrim Pipeline is a very major project that we're concerned with. It would start at Papskinny. Papskinny is a Mohican sachem, and this is our chief. And Papskinny Island is one of very few number of places that retain the traditional Mohican site name. And this is an island in the Mohican or Hudson River, and so it's full of village site, burial sites. It's a very important cultural site to the community. There's been archaeology done there in the past, and this painting on the bottom was drawn based true to life on the archaeology, and depicting what Papskinny Island looked like during Sachem Papskinny's time. And anyway, so Pilgrim Pipeline would cut right through the island, and that's been we usually don't take a position for or against a project. We just consult where we can under the laws for cultural resources. So, but in this one, our council did write a resolution in opposition to it, largely because of the threat that it poses, but also that there isn't a federal agency. Normally, pipelines are under FERC, but this one isn't. So we're really concerned that we won't have ability to consult on this project. So it's major concern. But these are some of the types of projects that we're working on and would work on with Fish and Wildlife if there is projects that are has potential to disturb new ground and impact a cultural site within our homeland. So some other ways that we are active in our homeland. These are 3 of our council members at the time visiting the only piece of land that we currently own within our original homelands is 63 acres along the Hudson River Valley, somewhat close to Albany area, that the tribe purchased because it was the only way to preserve a very important site that a farmer was plowing, every year, and so the council voted to preserve it, and we use that land for reburials. There's no, development plans on that. We have been organizing a youth camp each year with youth from the 2 Delaware tribes that I mentioned that are now in Oklahoma, but originally are from out east here with us, and so this was through our Munsee part of our heritage that we work with them on this project with National Park Service at the Delaware Water Gap in Pennsylvania, and which is also part of our our homeland, again through the Munsee part of our heritage. And so the youth have made a documentary about this experience and what it's like to all come together as Munsee people, and which doesn't normally happen. So there's that, and then also the career job exploration experience with the Park Service staff. So hopefully eventually we'll get a tribal member who takes an interest in archaeology and more interest in that type of work. But that's been a really awesome experience for our youth. And then I've been working with a volunteer in Stockbridge. He's been transcribing hundreds of deeds that are in the town offices there that are just from the earliest formation of Stockbridge, which was from our tribe, from Indiantown. And so they're just continue to be there, and you'd think that they would be at the Mass Archives or some other research institution, but they're just throughout the town offices. And so he's been transcribing those, and we've been doing the work to bring life to them and figure out where, for example, where they correspond to street addresses today, so that we can tell more specific history throughout Main Street. So we're working on a Mohican History walking tour and turning that into an app. The picture there is in the app is Norman Rockwell painting. It was the last painting on his easel when he passed away, and it's of Reverend John Sargent speaking to Sachem Concopat, Mohican Sachem, in the Mission House, which still exists, the Mission House in Stockbridge. And so anyway, that's kind of interesting that he was aware, Rockwell, in his time was so aware of our tribe, and we also, I know my grandma and others came out on a delegation in the 70s and got to meet with him. That was like the highlight of their lives, and anyway, so I think that's pretty neat. But NAGPRA is the other major area we work on, and so the one on the right is actually more in this area. It was through last year we worked with UMass Amherst College and Springfield Museum, and repatriated 184. They don't never really know exactly how many individuals are there, but these institutions returned all of these ancestors and funerary objects, like items that were buried with people, and they were all in their collections from various sources over time, but largely from Connecticut River Valley. And we worked this whole area where you all are here is kind of an overlap area. Our tribe has knowledge of our land deeds going up to the Westfield River, and we believe that we came as far as here, but also Nipmuc people, Pecumtuck, Abenaki. There's other tribes that all have presence here, but under the NAGPRA law, it's only federally recognized tribes. So we cover this area along with the Wampanoag tribe of Mashpee and Aquinnah, and Narragansett, and we all worked together on this and invited other tribal representatives for the reburial. And so we were able to, it was a really significant moment to rebury those ancestors that we all worked together on that. Anyway, so those are some examples of our work under NAGPRA. As I mentioned, we're trying to curate more and more of our own cultural materials, and we have an archaeologist that we contract with to represent our interests, for technical issues on archaeology. So we're moving forward in that way, and we often have homeland trips back out east. We have tribally sponsored ones, and then also people go out on their own for different family trips and that. But that's kind of a ongoing effort. And I think with all of that, I just wanted to make it clear that I know a lot of times for our tribe, people get the sense that we're a Wisconsin tribe, like somehow we left a long time ago, and we don't, suddenly we're back now. And I guess something that's important to me is to dispel that. And I put together, because in our point of view, we've never, the connection has never been broken. We've always returned. We've always had land claims. We've always had historical, interests to our cultural sites. It's always been home, and that hasn't changed. So these are just some of the examples I put together of some of the examples of our tribal members returning, which really is, like I said, in this unbroken timeline. So, like from way back, even when our tribe was in Stockbridge in the 1750s, even then we were already returning to our Hudson River Valley homelands that had been, ceded. So, like the town of New Lebanon, New York, Conamique, is a Mohican village. We returned there when we heard when we were in Stockbridge, but heard there was a road project going through there. Tribal members returned because we had left there not that long before, and we're familiar with the area, and so we went back and worked with their surveyor, Stockbridge Burying Ground, in 1809. After we were forced from Stockbridge, and we ended up in western New York among the Oneida tribe in a town that we named New Stockbridge, New York. During that time, then tribal members, there's records of people going back to Stockbridge to protect our burying ground site there. And yeah, just on and on, just so many different examples. The picture on the top is Reverend Slingerland. He's a tribal member of ours, but he returned to the burying ground, that monument there, in 1879, and spoke at a Laurel Hill Day, like an event in town. There's all the documentation for that. Picture on the right is Sam Miller, a sachem at the time that also returned to Stockbridge, and the picture on the bottom is two of our tribal members, again back in New Lebanon or Conamique, New York, and for rededication of a healing fountain, for a mineral spring that is important to the tribe. So anyway, it's been an ongoing series of returns that I feel like our historic preservation work today, and because of that law, it's just formalized a bit more, but it's never ended for us. And this one example, the 1854 John Quinney's speech, I think, is just really so beautiful. At this point, so Quinney, his Mohican name was Quinniquet, and he would, his family line goes back, to Stockbridge era, but at this point, 1854, he would have been in Wisconsin by then, but he returned back to New York, to a town called Reedsville, and he was invited to give a July 4th address, and so it's a really eloquent speech of his. It's really inspiring to read the Mohican writings. But anyway, so I think in honor of Native American Heritage Month, I wanted to share that with you all, and also knowing that Thanksgiving, is coming up, and that for us, like a lot of tribes, Thanksgiving is a year-round, experience of giving thanks. So I guess for my thanks to you all, I had printed off his speech to share with you, and I realized I didn't expect so many people. I don't have enough, so I guess I can pass around what I have, but I can also email that and make sure it gets out that way. So maybe I'll pass what I have. Yeah, and then this is some of the excerpts from his speech. I think is just like I said, wanted to share in honor of Native Heritage Month. In the spirit, my friends, as a Mohicanu, and now standing upon the soil which once was and now ought to be the property of this tribe, I have thought for once and certainly the last time I would shake you by the hand and ask you to listen for a little while to what I have to say. What are the treaties of the general government? How often and when has its plighted faith been kept? Indian occupation is forever next year, or one removal follows another, or by the next commissioner, more wise than his predecessor, repurchased, and thus your sympathies and justice are evinced in speedily fulfilling the terrible destinies of our race. My friends, your holy book, the Bible, teaches us that individual offenses are punished in an existence when time shall be no more, and the annals of the earth are equally instructive that national wrongs are avenged, and national crimes atoned for in this world, to which alone the confirmation of existence adapts them. These events are above our comprehension and for a wise purpose. For myself and for my tribe, I ask for justice. I believe it will sooner or later occur, and may the Great Spirit enable me to die in hope. So just wanted to say Anishik, I appreciate. It's an honor to read Quinney's words back in our homelands, and I hope that as you go about the work that you do, I hope in general, everyone, there's something that's useful in terms of thinking about Native history, and for our tribe in particular, if we have the chance to work together in the field on any of our projects, I hope that that helps keep in mind a little bit of where, in our perspective, where we're coming from, and where we see the work that we're doing today coming from, this long history and experience of removal, but also of leadership. So, Anishik, I will have a few minutes for questions, comments. And I think there's for everybody on the from the remote, like from the desks or websites, and you were saying there's a way to questions come up from there too?
Yep.
Or from the room, any comments, questions? Yes?
I was wondering about those tribes that lost their status. Is there any way for them to regain that status so they have a get in a room to talk about some of those projects?
Yeah, you mean like to be able to work under the National Historic Preservation Act?
Right,
yeah, so for that they would have to have federal recognition. Sometimes tribes go for state recognition, but to work under the National Historic Preservation Act would need to be federal. So yes, I mean there's a lot of tribes that were terminated can apply for federal recognition, but it's decades long, and so a lot of times it's not successful, or it takes much more time and resources than people have to keep fighting that. But that is the mechanism that's there. So like the what is our tribe out here that I know the Pamunkey in DC and the Shinnecock by Long Island, New York, they regained status in the last 5 years or so. But again, I mean that the time, expense, effort, and even if you have all the, I think a big part of that is showing that you've had continuous governance, like a method of, like a constitution and, you know, form of governance of leadership that has been unbroken, and a lot of times there was a period where that was disrupted, and so it's, you know, it's really hard for a lot of tribes. So, and I think it then also becomes obviously political, and even if you have all of the, you know, materials for that, for your court case, that often it, you know, there's politics that are beyond your control that would prevent you from getting status. So, yeah, it's really difficult. So I would say for the work that we do, like for 106 or for NAGPRA, if I know that, you know, personally, if I'm working on a project and know that it's in another tribe's area and, you know, where another tribe might be interested but not have status, then whenever possible, you know, I would, like for NAGPRA, we would try to repatriate. Sometimes like our tribe will repatriate because we can, but then give it to the materials to another tribe if it's more clearly from their heritage to rebury. So that happens too. Yes?
Hi, could you tell what the animals are in the symbol and what the significance to the tribes are?
Sure. So for us, that's in our seal there is they represent our clan system traditionally. So it's the wolf, turkey, bear, and turtle. So mine is the turtle. Not everybody, you know, we don't follow the clan system like how it would have been traditionally in terms of deciding who you could, you know, intermarry with and that kind of thing. It's just, I would say now I'd characterize it more as if you know your clan, it's kind of something that is a source of pride, or that people will sort of aspire to be like those kind of qualities, and also tease you about it, you know, that you're being, you know, like your clan. But I think part of it is that for any kind of decision, you would kind of want all those different strengths, you know, that each clan carries. So I think it comes up that way too. Like sometimes as a turtle, I can be like, oh, this is a project I need more of a, you know, a bear on or whatever. You know, it's kind of comes up that way. But, you know, for turtle, for example, would be something that I take to heart would be that it's like carrying your home on your back with you wherever you go. So being adaptable, resilient, and more of the long, you know, the long view, like longevity and that. So I take that to heart, and I think people feel similarly about their clan. Yeah. Any other questions, or from the those listening on the web online, or?
All's quiet so far.
Okay.
I've always been a bit curious about this special. I've always been a bit curious about the special role of veterans and fighting for this country amongst, you know, a lot of tribal people I've met, and I have
like why do we keep signing up for?
Yeah, and sort of that process for, you know, a young man or woman to decide that they want to serve. Like, do you think that happens differently in tribal communities than in the rest of the country?
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is that from what I understand from our veterans, you know, that it is a source of pride in knowing that, you know, I guess it's both that feeling like a sense of loyalty and that we've always, you know, been ready to serve, and I think that that's, you know, protecting your community. But I think historically too, like when people kind of question, well, why would we fight in Revolutionary War or something, you know, when it's directly in some way, you know, counter to our interests. I think you could also say, I think there's also a pressure, because of all the pressures at the time too, then it's kind of, for a lot of people at that time, like when we were in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and the Revolutionary War was going on, by that time, you know, it was so much, again, loss of land, and because our ways of life were different there, that a lot of people, also, you can see in the writings that it's like a time to enlist because it is another opportunity, you know, that it's something where you're, you know, personally, you know, it's also like, you know, you think you might, you know, having the meals and everything, you know, having like other opportunities, and then when you return, the idea that if we've served as a community, if we've served our country, the U.S., then our tribe will be more respected and be better off. You know, we'll if we've learned Christianity, English, we fought in the wars, all together, these things are going to advance our community's interests and stature, but that wasn't the case. A lot of men, when they returned to Stockbridge from the Revolutionary War, their lands had been taken, so, yeah. Any other questions? We have a couple minutes. You can also talk to people over cider if you want. Yes?
So thank you for a wonderful and interesting presentation. So I guess I've been fascinated by the Mohican Nation since I was a kid and read James Fenimore Cooper's book. So it was a cool thing to read. I'm sure it's not accurate. And,
yeah, it's fiction.
Of course.
Yeah.
But it sounded,
I mean, because we're here, but also because, the character's like Uncas. I haven't read it or seen the movie because obvious reasons, but Uncas, I think, is the character in it, right?
Yeah.
And he's actually Mohegan. So if anything, I think it's trying to relate to Mohegan tribe more, but it's all fiction.
So how many folks still live on the reservation that consider themselves to be of the Mohican or Munsee Nation? Is that just
who consider themselves to be just Mohican, or you mean to be members of Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican community?
The larger community, I think, just to have some perspective on.
Yeah, we have about roughly 1,500 members, and with the blood quantum issue I mentioned, it is going down every year rather than up. So again, we've got to address that. But there's about 1,500 members right now, and about a little more than a third live on the reservation, within the reservation borders itself. But then I don't know, maybe another 25% or more, live within the vicinity, just not on the reservation land, but in nearby towns or something, and then other people live wherever else.
And you said now they can actually stay on the reservation
Yes.
and make a living there. The economy is such.
Right.
And is that through tribal related kind
they're
of
just our
economic
businesses.
generation?
Yeah, we have a casino. It's not, it's kind of modest, I guess, casino compared to what I've seen more, out here. But we have a casino. We have a propane business, a convenience store, like a gas station, and a golf course and restaurant. We just bought a strip mall and are leasing that out. So there's the casino's obviously and has a hotel with it, so that's the main anchor of the economy. So, but then we also, like I said, have the other businesses, and then our investments, and then we do have government grants, like the health center, for example, gets IHS grants, as well as we fund. I think it's about 50-50 that we fund, and then the IHS grants. So for historic preservation work, it's largely through a National Park Service grant, and those are in danger. We're really worried that they might not, cultural resource issues are not really, there's all different acts right now before Congress, like there's one where it's to remove barriers to wireless infrastructure, like removing cell tower. The potential is that it might eliminate or severely reduce tribal reviews of cell tower projects, because it's standing in the way of rapidly, getting those built. So, it's not a great time for that. So we're concerned if those, funding sources are cut, then, what that would mean.
Thank you.
Good. Everyone good? Cider time? Okay. Oh, again, Anishi.